Hello and welcome to the North Yorkshire Police, Fire and Crime Commissioners Public Accountability Meeting. Hello, my name's welcome to the North Yorkshire Police, joined here with Crime Commissioners, colleagues, Public Accountability Meeting. Hello, my name's welcome to the North Yorkshire, and joined here from Enable as well, colleagues, with us, Accountability Meeting. First of all, hello, my name's welcome to the North Yorkshire, and joined here from Enable as well, colleagues, with us, Accountability. Lisa Winward, the Chief Constable, Mark Pannoni, the Assistant Chief Constable, Lindsay Butterfield, Assistant Chief Constable, and Jenny Newbury, the Head of Commissioning and Partnerships at the OPFCC. We have some actions from the previous meeting that we had. In terms of those actions, is there anything, colleagues, that need updating? Has anybody picked up on anything that needs addressing? I haven't anything that I've picked up, in which case we will move on. We have, first of all, we have a question from the, one question this time from the public. Does somebody want to, Amanda, would you like to put that up on screen for us?
Yes, bear with me 1 second.
Okay, so please explain why the police are not prepared to use Section 61 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994 against trespassers making threats and demanding payment after unlawfully occupying school sports fields. This relates to travellers, not just in the Harrogate area, but further afield across North Yorkshire. Sometimes they go on council property, sometimes it's private property. I think the Deputy Chief Constable is going to pick this question up. Over to you, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, and thank you for the question being submitted. So just in relation to the use of police powers, what we have is a graduated response with regards to any incident of this type. And the reason why we have a graduated response is because we have to balance the human rights of all parties involved. And again, with travelling community, again, we are also aware that most of the time, very often, travelling community will contain families with small children and others as well that could be impacted as a result of police activity. So the graduated response from North Yorkshire Police, as it is with other forces, actually, not just North Yorkshire Police, is we will not resort straight away to criminal prosecution. What we will do is we will engage with the travelling community and the landowners, as we have done on this occasion, and we will seek to resolve the matter at the earliest opportunity using the most intrusive means possible. And that includes graduating up through private landowners, public landowners, utilising powers in civil courts for removal of unlicensed travellers' settlements, all the way through to, as listed here, the final element, which will be the criminal prosecution. On this occasion, we have the local officers have engaged with the travelling community, and they have agreed to move on without the need for us to resort to criminal prosecution. My understanding is that they have now left the site. I have been briefed that there has been no damage caused and very little litter left behind as a result of that. So I think for me, it is a case of, it's not that we're not prepared to use these powers, is that actually there has to be a graduated response, and we have to show that graduated response as well in order to ensure that we are compliant with the Human Rights Act.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now move on to the next item because we don't have any other questions. And this is from North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Services. It's a presentation on water safety, prevention trends and capabilities, and it's a presentation. I think it's going to be led by Andy Blades with his colleagues Bob Hoskins and Adam Farrow. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. We're looking to present on all the arrangements in place from North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service point of view associated with water and water safety. It will include information around response. So when we respond to emergency incidents which involve water, But probably more importantly, in terms of all the activity we do across service, prevention is the key, that we look to make sure that people are informed, educated and warned about some of the hazards and risks which are evident within the water profile of the county. So my substantive role is as the head of York and Selby as a district. So I have good awareness of water and the hazards and risks and the water safety activity that goes on within that district. But today is really important for me that we look at that from a county-wide perspective, because it is very much something that North Yorkshire as an entire county sees a prevalence of, both in terms of people accessing the water for leisure, or whether they access the water intentionally to harm themselves, or if they enter the water to intentionally perhaps part of other leisure activities. And that's got a different profile across the county, which we'll go into today. My current temporary role as the Director of Assurance will assure the Chief Officer, the Commissioner and the communities and public of North Yorkshire that the arrangements that we have to respond to emergencies are the appropriate level, and also that prevention activity is meeting the needs of the hazard and risk that we see within the county. So to aid the presentation, as I mentioned, I'm joined today by Group Manager Bob Hoskins, who's the temporary Group Manager within the York and Selby district, and also Adam Farrow, Watch Manager, who's a dedicated prevention colleague within the organisation. So if I could have the next slide, please. So North Yorkshire is England's largest county with, as we know, a wide range of water hazards and risk across the county. So as it sets out there, right across the east coast, that 60 kilometres of coastline sees seaside resorts, harbours and locations where people will often use the water for commercial enterprises, for industry, and also for leisure activities. And we work with partners in that area, well known across the country, with the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, for example. As we come inland, those waterways, which are pretty significant across the county, detailed there, including the Ouse, the Swale, the Wharfe, are main rivers in the county and present all sorts of hazards, from cold, deep water to moving water, those with tidal capabilities around the Selby area, for example, and the tributaries then that break down into feeding other areas and then move all the way through to those seaside coastal resorts. We also have the canals, including Leeds and Liverpool, and the Ayr and Calder Canal. So really quite a wide variety of different waterways from the river and canal perspective. We work with the Canals and River Trust as one partner within those localities as well, and of course a really wide range of partners across the piece. The inland lakes and quarries that we see present a really significant hazard around cold water risk. So very often when we see a change in the weather conditions and we have hot spells, then people will take to those inland lakes, quarries and deep parts of water for leisure activities, which isn't always clear the hazards and risks that are present in those. And we do see, unfortunately, a number of injuries and deaths across the county from the water hazards and risks that we have there. And of course, flash floods, which is something very prevalent to North Yorkshire, that we see continuing, and whether that's linked to climate change or other factors, we do see a prevalence which is quite regular and frequent now in North Yorkshire. And that means that we have different capabilities which will be talked about today across the presentation. But within those capabilities as well, we also have national assets which we would use for responding to some of the more large-scale, widespread flooding. And that's really important to our capability, both within North Yorkshire, regionally and nationally on that footprint. But with all that hazard and risk that we see from water, the statutory duties within the Fire and Rescue Services Act do not include water capabilities, so rescue capability within that legislation. So we do align to other documentation and strategy, which starts to steer as an organisation and how we provide response and how we will coordinate the prevention activity across North Yorkshire. And that includes documents such as National Framework, the Fire and Rescue Plan, and also the Community Safety Plan that's currently in review, and also the Ambition 2025 documents. So they form a lot of the strategic direction that we have to make sure that the needs of the public within those water environments is met. And really key to that is that the Community Safety Plan at the moment would include water rescue and flood capabilities around the special services needs that we see as an organisation. And that's being reviewed by the risk and resource model. And that work's underway at the moment to develop what's already understood at the moment, but to align the water rescue capability and indeed the prevention activity that goes hand in hand with that, aligned to those hazards and risks that we see present in the slide and across the county. So that's a really important piece of work to ensure that anything that North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service have the ability to deploy, how we work with other regional partners in West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Humberside for the Yorkshire region, but indeed as we go over the borders into Durham and Darlington and Cleveland, then that capability is really fit and aligned to the hazard and risk that we see within the county. So that gives a general overview really of the service as we are at this time, and we'll start to explain that in some more detail. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Bob Hoskins. We'll start to build some of that picture with some of the information from there.
Thanks very much, Andy. So if I just have the next slide, please. So across the county, and we're faced with a number of other
Aha. Can anybody else hear him? No.
I've lost audio as well, Philip.
I think we're losing audio.
Hello, can you hear me now?
That's better. Do you want to minimize, turn off your video and just use the audio?
Okay.
I think your bandwidth is probably very narrow.
Yeah. Is that better?
That's a bit better, Bob.
Okay, I'll try and continue. If there's any problems, just let me know. Okay. So as I was saying, lots of people who enter the water don't actually intend to enter the water. It's through a mishap. We also can have rapid rise in water levels due to adverse weather conditions. We have swift water in the county that can be again caused through weather, but it also people can go to find swift water. So in the Swale, people go there to canoe, whitewater canoeing. So that can cause hazards. Cold water shock can occur in any body of water when people enter, and due to the cold temperatures, the body starts to shut down and go into spasm, which can cause a large risk to the public. Within these bodies of water, there's a large amount of debris, hidden material, weeds, etc. And people once in the water can get tangled in that and get into trouble. And then we also have tombstoning, which is when people jump off high objects into water, and because they're not necessarily sure what's under the water, can cause themselves serious injury. And that can be off man-made structures or natural structures around any body of water. Okay, next slide. So currently across the service, we have a number of levels of water provision which our crews can use. So these align to the DEFRA operational standards. And the first level, which we train all our crews to, is what we call Mod 2. As I said, all crews have this level of training, and it allows crews to work from the bankside and also to wade into shallow water to carry out a rescue. Now, Mod 3, this is at 3 stations across the county, Whitby, Bolton and Richmond, and this allows our crews a greater access to the water. They can actually enter the water fully, carry out aggressive swims to reach people out in the water. But again, most of that work is carried out from the bankside. The Mod 4 crews, which we currently have at Selby, are trained to the Mod 3 standard. They can enter the water to carry out rescues, but they also have the addition of a power boat, which allows them to move quickly up and down rivers or across bodies of water to get to people who might be more in more hard to reach areas. And York they have a powerboat, but they are only trained currently to the Mod 2 standard. So they operate from the boat and don't actually physically enter the water to carry out rescues in the York area. Provided, but we can also move the other Mod 2s and Mod 4s to where is required if an incident was occurring. So the location of our water rescue equipment. So York currently has the highest risk of water in the county. And unfortunately, over the last 5 years, we have had over 20 fatalities in the Ouse and around York. So York's situated on the junction of two rivers. The large Ouse, which is a very wide body of water, can be very fast moving in spate conditions, also has a huge volume of craft on it, from small pleasure craft up to the large craft that the visitors use to have a look around York. And then we've also got next to that the Foss, which is a much smaller, slower flowing river, but that has the issues that once you enter it, the vertical sides mean it's very, very difficult to get out of. And the picture in the bottom shows some of the buildings that create those vertical sides around that particular body of water. York have a powerboat, like we've already said, but again, due to its size, it's sometimes difficult to get into these bodies of water. But the crews then have to resort to other methods to carry out those rescues. But due to the level of incidents and the variety of types of water in York, we're hoping that the RRM will look at that and will dictate that we can put some other resources in there to improve that capability. So what are the opportunities that are laid out for it? So the geography of North Yorkshire, it's a huge county. Andy's already covered the range of water risks we'll have across that county. Now the risk resource model is going to give an opportunity to align those risks with the resources we've got to make sure we can provide the public with the best possible turnout to those incidents, to give them, give us the best equipment in those particular areas to carry out the rescues were required. Data has always been a problem. We have fire brigade data, police data, data from the RNLI, Mountain Rescue and the York Rescue Boat, but everyone's using different systems to record. We use different parameters to record. So collating data is very, very difficult. But moving forward, we hope these agencies can work together, start matching the data up to give us a much better picture, which will allow us to direct our prevention activities where it's most needed and give the messages that are required. Andy's already alluded to the fact that it isn't a statutory duty for the fire service to carry out water rescues. So funding for this sort of work has always been difficult. We do get some funding from DEFRA, or we have in the past, but this isn't necessarily continual and can't be guaranteed every year. Also, the equipment and the training implications of water rescue work can also be costly. So working this into budgets has always been a challenge. Training also has an issue that training is very time taken. We've got to travel to different areas to do it. Our training courses are in Wales or up at Tees Barrage. So that not only has the implication for the brigade that we've got to get crews there, but also once those crews are there, which can be for a number of days, we have to provide backfills for those stations to allow standard fire cover to continue. We have already started to put some improvements in place. We are upgrading current PPE across all stations, but currently 5 stations have started that process and are receiving upgraded dry suits and personal flotation devices. We've carried out improvements to the York boat, which has had prop guard, which covers the propeller, so that when we are carrying out rescues, it doesn't harm the person that is being rescued in the water. And we've improved the lighting on that craft. We're improving the skills of the crews in the York area. We're introducing them to a tethered swim, which will allow us to enter specific bodies of water, being the Foss, to allow us to, again, improve our reaction to those incidents that provide a better response to the public. And over the last month, been working very closely with the underwater search team at Humberside to improve coordination between us and that particular organisation, and also to allow the improvement on body recoveries from the water, so that we can do this in a controlled way which doesn't affect the forensics that the police need if they need to look into the incident later on. And York and Selby have both been provided now with body recovery systems, which allow us to contain the body in a forensic environment until the police can recover it and carry out the tasks they need to carry out. So as you can see, we're already moving on and providing extra facilities to enable us to deal with water-specific incidents across the whole county. So we're just going to look at where some of the incidents are. Just click the next. So I put some little sort of hot spots on this map here. So you can see that York and Selby have a number of incidents around them. Now these incidents, we'll talk a little bit more in the next few slides, have changed in type over the last few years. But in these areas, the incidents tend to be related to mental health, people trying to enter the water of their own volition. And yet in the Craven area around Grassington, Skipton, and you can see Richmond there, the incidents in this area, which have increased over recent time, tend to be people entering the water for leisure purposes. So that can be when the weather's hot, trying to cool down, or they're using the water for recreation, such as canoeing and things like that. So we can definitely see that there's a difference in incident profile. And there have been some incidents recently over in Gothland as well, which I believe were related to the tombstone that we talked about earlier on. So just to sort of overlay where our current station, current mod stations are in relation to that, the mod 3 stations are currently located at Richmond, Bolton, and on the coast out at Whitby there. The mod 4 station is down at Selby, and then we've got the water rescue unit based in York. And the risk resource model is going to allow it to, if necessary, move those resources to where these incidents have been identified as being most prevalent and allow us to, as I said. But what we've got to remember from that is all the appliances across the service can provide a level of water rescue. These are just the enhanced level 3 and mod 4 units we've shown you there. But the crews out at Grassington, Settle and Skipton all have that mod 2 capability on those appliances. So the incident profile, what can we glean from the information that we've got? Well, over the past 5 years, there has been a definite change in the York area specifically about the type of people that we have been assisting. A few years ago, the profile was quite clear. It was young people aged between 18 and 25. They were entering the water between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning and usually on weekends. However, in the last 3 or 4 years, we're starting to see a change in this profile, and this is moving now to an older age group. The issues are much more complex and sort of associated with mental health issues. And then, as we've discussed, outside of York, the profile changes again, and this tends to be leisure activities and people entering the water to enjoy themselves, and then they're getting into trouble because they're not sure of the risks or not aware of the risks that are in that water, such as cold water shock, etc. We've got some statistical data we'd just like to show you now. Now, I just need to make clear that this data has been collected at station over the last few years, because as we've already said, data can be very difficult to draw out of the system. I'll give you an example of that. If someone is potentially entering the water, threatening to jump off a bridge, that could be classed in the statistics as a suicide attempt and not necessarily a water-related incident, because maybe the police were able to talk them down before they actually jumped. Not entering the water then changes the way that incident is potentially recorded. But from the data we have collected over the last number of years, you can see that unfortunately the fatalities are staying quite regular in the York area, but the age profile is the interesting statistic, where you can see it slowly climbed over the last 3 years from an average age of, like we said, approximately 20 years old. It's now climbing towards people who are in the late 60s and edging towards 70 years old. And that comes down to those mental health issues we spoke about earlier on. The next statistical table shows you about rescues we've actually carried out. And when I say rescues, that's people who are physically in the water and needed us to enter the water to bring them to a place of safety. The reason we've got the no data available, unavailable is, again, this is locally collected data, which we take from our daily summaries. And again, it's difficult to attain people's ages when we are rescuing them, because there's a lot going on. So, but again, what this shows is that we are regularly carrying out rescues from the River Ouse and the River Foss in the York area. So practical interventions. In the York area, we have set up the York Water Safety Forum. This has a large number of partners within it. The fire service, the police, the council, we've got the RNLI, the local universities, the Canal and Rivers Trust. So a good spectrum of people who can assist us in lots of ways to try and make the river safer, and we can share information and ideas. Some of the things we've done in the recent past are we've painted all the escape ladders on the river a bright orange colour. It was identified that when people were in the water, because the ladders were black, you couldn't actually see where they were. So now they're a bright colour, so people entering the water can swim towards these and carry out, hopefully, a self-rescue. We've been working with the council to fix signage along the river with telephone numbers for people like the Samaritans on. So if people are in a place where they feel that they need to talk to someone, they can make a phone call, hopefully rather than carrying out something that might cause them harm. We've also initiated the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents report. Now, the last one was compiled in York about 8 to 10 years ago, and we feel that some of the findings for this are now out of date because lots of things have happened. So we're asking for another independent report to take place to see what they feel could still be improved along the river and what we could put in place. And the links with the universities have been drastically improved over the last few years. We now have access to over 6,000 students every year coming in for Freshers Week, and we have direct talks with them to explain the dangers of the water. We've also been making some movies this year because with everyone working online, those courses now can be fed directly to the students and then go back to them to get feedback on safety around water, safe passages home, and how to what they can do when they see someone in the water to carry out rescues if they are there first. Okay, so there is quite a lot of practical stuff happening around York as well. But what I need to make clear is that there is prevention work carried out across the whole county. So to talk about that now, I'm going to hand over to Adam, who'll give you the wider picture on prevention work.
Thanks, Bob. Hopefully you can all hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, Adam Farrow here, just to talk about the wider prevention work going on around water safety throughout North Yorkshire. So our sort of prevention strategy follows the National Drowning Prevention Strategy. There's several key points on that we try and engage with as much as possible. One is around youth education. So we do a lot of education with young people throughout, the school term and in school holidays. One of the areas that we tend to focus on is our day in the life courses. These are one-day interventions, which we get referrals through the Prince's Trust and the National Citizens Scheme. And we build water safety into that to give our young people some information, education and engagement around water safety. We also run life courses, which are local intervention of fire education courses, 5-day courses with people referred to us from community hubs, youth justice service and pupil referral units. We also have enhanced our water safety lessons in schools. So we do a lot of Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 talks. And that's one of the key aspects and aims of the UK Drowning Prevention Strategy. Obviously, during COVID, a lot of our activities had to be adapted, but they still were ongoing, albeit changed ever so slightly. We do a lot of multi-agency work, which is another key part of the Drowning Prevention Strategy, working with, obviously, as Bob went into the York Water Safety Forum, but we also engage a lot with our Yorkshire Water colleagues. These are the second biggest landowner in North Yorkshire, and they have a lot of estate around water, obviously, reservoirs and such. So we have ongoing relationships with them, but they are one of our key stakeholders that we engage with. We do a lot of work on social media and messaging as a whole, whether that's on any of the social media platforms or via leaflets. getting on board with a lot of the national social media campaigns, such as Doing It for Dylan, Daniel's story or Charlie's story, all national campaigns around people that unfortunately either been injured or lost their life in water. That picture there we've got is from Richmond, and this emphasises our sort of fourth bullet point really well. We do a lot of engagement, education, talks and demonstrations at our local risk sites, and our fire stations and our community safety officers and our public safety officers all know their local risk sites, where their incidents tend to be, where during the hot summer months and during COVID lockdowns people have flocked to instead of going abroad. And that picture there is a really good picture we've taken, just as we've got members of the public engaging and educating with ourselves. Around the really high risk sites, we've had patrols from our public safety officers conducted, especially during periods of high traffic. So when we know we've got bank holiday weekends, for example, or even just hot days throughout the week, which you know, maybe hotter than other days, and we know that we'd see an influx of people into that area. We've installed some equipment with some of our other partners, other landowners, and we're working to install some more of them as much as we possibly can, engaging with local landowners, local estate holders, councils, and people like Yorkshire Water as well, to get as much equipment, signage in these places as we possibly can do. As we've taken on board the National Fire Chiefs Council messaging of respect the water, it's not about necessarily telling people not to go into the water. It's more about engaging, teaching them about the hazards, telling them to stick together, looking out for each other, going into the water with safety at the forefront of their mind, and not going in to anywhere which is too dangerous. And the last bullet point there is something that the Royal National Lifeboat Institute have started pushing around the country, but where we have riverside establishments, particularly bars, restaurants, public houses, things like that, where people are either walking home from a night out or enjoying time with their friends. We've been assisting with that and providing training, awareness training to the establishment holders, the staff that work there, and also giving them some throw line input. So if they need to make an intervention, if they can safely do so, they can do. Moving on to the next slide, just want to talk about a sort of coordinated approach which we've used this year. So it's the first year where we've run a dedicated 4-month water safety campaign, and we're literally just coming to the end of that now, being the end of August. I must say that our water safety campaign work will still carry on into September. You know, if we get periods of hot weather, it's never not an issue for us. We will always support it. But our 4-month campaign was something that we really wanted to dedicate a lot of time to this year. So to do that, we've introduced lots of in-house training and resourcing for our own staff. Got the messaging right, got the resources right, engaged with our own staff in service to get the right message out there to the communities that they serve and to the members of the public in the county. One of the key things that we did was working with Yorkshire Water and a local college. We produced a video which we launched for Drowning Prevention Week, which is a national Royal Lifesaving Society Prevention Week in July. And this was around young people who don't really have any intention of entering the water when they set out that day. Maybe they're going out for a few drinks with friends or picnic, but for whatever reason choose to go into cold water and then get themselves into trouble, which is one of the issues that we find at Yorkshire Water site specifically. Another campaign which we've got involved with was in April, which is the National Fire Chiefs Council Be Water Aware campaign, which is all about respecting the water and floating to survive. So another coordinated approach that we've got on board with. This next slide, which hopefully has come up on your screens now, gives you a little taste of some of our statistics of our activities around water safety throughout the county. This is just water safety. The top left picture, the map of our county, shows where our activities are and where we've where we've completed them. So you can see there's an awful lot of work that gets done in Selby, Tadcaster, York area, that particular district that Bob was talking about. But we've also got lots of other little risk sites which our stations have picked up, not necessarily in urban centres, but way out in the sticks, well away from where fire and rescue services appliances are. We see a lot of work getting done up in Richmondshire and also down in Craven, where we've unfortunately had some fatalities on the River Wharf at Grassington and Bolton Abbey. The bar chart at the bottom of the screen there, it's in different colours. The colours are associated to which fire station has completed that work. You can see like the light green is Richmond. They've done a lot of work in July. The dark blue and the light blues are York, Acomb, Huntington. That's the Selby district. They'll put in Selby York district, put in a lot of work into water safety. And basically the bars along the bottom, if there isn't a month there, it's because we didn't do any water safety education during that month. So obviously during the colder months it's slowed down, but during our 4-month prevention campaign for water safety, obviously the hot weather and reduction of COVID restrictions has pushed more people out and allowed us to do a lot more water safety education and engagement. And breaking them figures down a little bit more, we can see that one of the main aims of the drowning prevention strategy was to do more school education. And although that has been restricted due to COVID and amended, and we've adapted our way of delivery, we've still managed to do 55 school education sessions throughout the county, and the rest kind of is a combination of demonstrations, social media campaigns, engagement settings, and partnership and multi-agency work. The last slide that I want to talk about is an example of some of our coordinated approach towards prevention work and water safety. It's not in York. This is about River Wharf. Quite a few incidents at the River Wharf, which runs from Grassington and sort of flows through our county and goes down to Bolton Abbey. In order to pull all this work together, we've had to engage with quite a lot of other agencies, the parish councils. We've had to unite them to recognise that there is a bit of a water safety issue in their area. Highways Department to liaise around the parking and the access to these places. Obviously North Yorkshire Police and the Yorkshire Ambulance Service, but also West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Services. They have response and good response into that area just as much as we do. And we've been able to coordinate some of our prevention work with West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service as well, due to the fact that a lot of people that visit Bolton Abbey and the River Wharf are not necessarily from North Yorkshire. So our education and our social media messaging and communications are not necessarily going to get to them because they're outside of our county. So we've coordinated that with West Yorkshire to ensure that we are managing to target the right people at the right time. So what have we done? We're soon going to be installing some new signage with the help of National Parks and Gravett District Council. And we've recently, with the help of Drew Jennings and Robbie Kirkbride from our Public Safety Officer, we've managed to run a water rescue exercise and engagement day at Bolton Abbey. So this was to demonstrate our response to the area, but also to engage with the public to show off what we can do, and also why they need to be wary of some of these areas and not necessarily don't go in the water, but respect the water as per our social media messaging and a centralised approach. So that's the end of our water safety presentation. The next slide is any questions, but I will stop sharing at that point.
Well, thank you very much, and I think that's very informative in terms of what's going on. If I just pick up on 2 or 3, well, the more observations than anything else, I think the Mod 4 training for York is vital, and I think we need to do that as soon as we can. I understand that may be part of the RRM, but that's important in terms of flooding. In terms of rescuing people. They've got a rescue boat there, and effectively the firefighters aren't trained to Mod 4, so the boat can't be used when it's most needed, which seems a bit convoluted. So I'd like some reassurance when that training will take place. The second issue is that you've done, from what I can see, a very good job with things like Freshers Week, talking to students and educating them in York at the 2 unis about the perils of particularly the use. But what we're doing to reach out to people who are in the 60s plus to actually inform them, because the log there that you've provided, particularly based on the use, is that the majority of people falling in over the last couple of years and unfortunately becoming fatalities are around 68. So there's obviously a piece of work needs doing around there and reaching out to that age group. So that was the 2 questions I'd like to ask, and then I'll open it up to colleagues.
Are we mute off?
No,
yeah, just checking you can hear through the microphone. So in response to the first question, yeah, I think it's really important that risk and resource model considers all those risks and the capability. Just for clarity, really, the Module 4 capability is something that gives us the ability to respond as a national asset. So at the moment, within our Selby location, we've got that Module 4, but absolutely, if there's an opportunity to enhance that skill set around York, particularly, that's something that will be captured within the risk and resource model, and we can work with the representative bodies as well to understand, the appetite within the firefighter cadre to take on that training, and it's a piece of work that we'll look to capture within that project. With regards to the older age group and some of our safety activity, I think it's really important that we get that broad view. And one of the things that we're starting to move on with now, having the opportunity to work with colleague Vicky Booty with regards to benefits management. So it's really understanding of where some of these campaigns will get the best benefit and building that into that initial work. And that prevention activity is probably a really good example where we can look at the most benefit we will get from a prevention activity. And certainly from that mental health perspective and that older age group that we're seeing in that particular area, that would be a key benefit that we'd look to capitalise on the prevention work. So both points that we would sort of take the opportunity to feedback on as well if we could in the future.
Okay, good. I'll open it up. Colleagues, has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? A hand's gone up, Peter Mountain.
Thanks very much. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Just one thing that does occur to me is with a changing environment and demands across North Yorkshire, how do you keep up with the changing risks from the water threats? How do you make sure you fully understand the current risk and the future risks?
Yeah, so again, it's probably a really pertinent question because some of the risk information we hold probably wouldn't have captured every element of water hazard that we have in the county and how that profile is changing as we see with different weather conditions. So to give that some context, we know historically that there are areas which are subject to that floodwater risk, so predominantly around the south of the county. However, in recent years, we're probably all aware that in the sort of west of the county, we've seen much more evidence of spate flooding, where we've had sudden downpours, really significant immediate flooding. So what we're looking to do is build that into the site-specific risk information that we hold. So any location, that can be a building, or it could be a rail network, or it could be, in this case, a water hazard, then we look to make sure we hold the risk information, which then allows us to confirm that we've got the capability to respond if that happens. So again, it's fair to say, Peter, that's work ongoing and to be developed. But that also does align us with national operational guidance as well. So there's been a shift nationally in the way the Fire and Rescue Service has underpinning knowledge and understanding, and to have that understanding of risk, share it with our regional partners, will also help us align to national operational guidance.
JD?
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to build on that, Peter, one of the key outcomes of the RRM is about partnership working, and we cannot deliver this, by ourselves. And the more that we're able to integrate with partners, we can get their data, we can get the understanding of the risk from their perspective, allows us then to have that future view. And that's really what we're basing this on. It's what we're basing our community profile on, and making sure we're addressing that risk in the future. Because you're right, and particularly as the age profile increases, we need to adapt to that environment as well. we are on with that. Thank you.
Chief Fire Officer.
Thank you, Commissioner. And again, just to build on what's already been said there, Peter, as Andy mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, at the moment, water rescue is not one of the statutory responsibilities for fire. So there's a real issue there in terms of funding to make sure that we are fully resourced. But, you know, nonetheless, I'd like to reassure the public that we've got a good spread of resources available at the moment. But then building on what Jonathan's just mentioned there in terms of partnership work, we do work very closely with other agencies that have got water rescue capability as well. And that includes the FEL rescue organisations and other organisations around the county. So there's a broad spectrum of skills out there, which we do link into as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions from anyone? Good. Okay, well, I'd like to thank you. Oh, sorry, Peter's going back. Peter.
Sorry, if you don't mind, just another question, but quite a quick one. You've been talking about not having the statutory responsibilities for water rescue. Does that mean that you wouldn't deal with any rescues of large animals? You'd only be looking at rescue for humans?
No, I can answer that one, Peter. No, we will always aim to make a rescue, particularly obviously where it's a human or life at risk, and we would do that. Where animals are involved, it's very rare you would get an issue where there is an animal in fast flowing water, so we can provide an intervention into there. But the key factor being that response would vary depending on if there were humans involved in there. We wouldn't necessarily put firefighters at risk for an animal that wasn't potentially able to be saved. If there was human life within there, we would obviously go to the absolute nth degree to make sure we've got everything covered to provide that emergency response.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Deputy Chief Fire Officer. Fine. Okay, well, thank you for the presentation and for the interesting slides and the facts you provided, and we'll move on. So I think we're back to the Deputy Chief Fire Officer again, who's going to give us a North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service performance update.
Thank you, Commissioner. I am going to try and share the PowerPoint. People can tell me when that's shared, please.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, and we'll go on. I'll just go back to, there we are. So we have seen, looking in this area, so for July, we've seen an increase of 87 calls over the last month. And this is in line, again, with the trend that we're seeing as the country unlocks and as people return to work. We are seeing an increase in certain incident types. Predominantly, this is broken down between false alarms, fires and special services, remembering that special services predominantly for us is around road traffic collisions. However, that can also involve assisting the ambulance service to gain entry into properties and also our police colleagues in certain situations. It isn't a significant increase for us, and it isn't something that is of concern because our prevention and protection work is still aligned to aiming to reduce the alarms work, which we'll come on to later, albeit we are still, of course, working with our colleagues to make sure we respond to those special services. We'll see that the top 3 incidents remain consistent for us across the quarter and for the last 3 years, albeit varying in slight order there about fires in the open. We did see an increase during lockdown of fires in the open as people were burning rubbish and having small fires at home, but that again has changed now back into our previous order. Our false alarm overview. Now, without going into detail on each of the areas of the slides, back in 2019, we had a high of 299 calls within July. And then as the country went into various lockdown periods, we saw an alignment of false alarm calls and interventions that we were providing. And once again, as we climb out of lockdown and the country goes back to work, into the workplace and the schools again return, we are seeing AFAs on the increase. The breakdown of those, however, continue to be the highest proportion into false alarm by apparatus. Now, those are broken down into predominantly environmental influences, and we have seen a warm period You'll possibly remember last time the chief gave an update that we have insects in alarms, which causes quite a few problems, accidental damage. And again, as properties and premises are being renovated and the ongoing work that goes on there, we do have instances where alarms are damaged, or due to the work they're doing with dust, does cause us to have alarms. We sometimes have inappropriate human contact where people hit alarms inadvertently, or one of the key factors is, of course, faulty equipment. And it is something that our prevention and protection departments are pushing with businesses as they return to the workplace to make sure their alarm systems, their health and safety, or their normal protocols for calling the police have been reviewed with the responsible person, and where alarm systems or other proactive systems are working fully before people returning to the workplace. Once again, our false alarms, yes, they are a large proportion of our calls. However, as people return back into the workplace, we have only seen a 1% increase across the board around these areas. For the public, false alarm good intent are the fires where people believe there is a fire, but for us it turns out to be something like people burning rubbish in their back gardens, so it isn't a significant issue. We provide advice, we make sure they're doing it safely, and provided it is garden waste and it's legal to be burnt, then we're able to leave that incident. I've discussed around the fire detection systems. Now, the parts where it concerns our primary focus is on the residential premises. The alarms there still contain a life risk, so we will always mobilise appliances and appropriate crews and specialist staff where required to make sure we're providing that intervention. This, of course, then is also in line with the commercial side around the education that we provide. We're trying to educate people to understand the impact of false alarms, what that does to our resources, and the fact that we may not have appliances available to respond to other emergencies whilst our appliances are tied up at those incidents. And thankfully, only 2% of our calls are made up of false alarm malicious, which is where people maliciously make a call or activate a system, which then, of course, has the response from the fire service to that site. Our absence levels. Now, our absence levels, following a 3-year trend, and after the COVID lockdowns, we have seen them return to our 3-year average. We did see, and as you'll see there, a spike between confirmed cases of COVID and during the pandemic, where we had a significant number of people self-isolating. And as stated last time, this did include situations where we had entire watches taken off because of the close contact issued by the NHS track and trace app. Thankfully, we're starting to see that return down now in August, down to our average levels. But we are, and as always, working with occupational health and other support mechanisms to make sure we can get staff back into the workplace, appliances available, and our optimum crew wherever possible. This is reflected in our absence. Once again, we haven't seen significant increase. Remembering that our on-call stations, we record their absence differently to whole-time staff. Whole-time staff predominantly work a 4-on, 4-off system, 4 days on, 4 days off, and we record their sickness or absence within that 4-day window. On-call stations work over a 7-day period, so their absence is recorded slightly differently, which is reflected in these figures. However, our key focus is on musculoskeletal and mental health absence from work. We have a significant amount of support mechanisms in place for staff through our Enable colleagues, and we continue to try and grow those areas to make sure this is reduced wherever possible. Now, the overall fire cover. This has been impacted of a continuing trend where we have seen, to the top left of the page, you'll see there an 11.8%, which represents our critical stage, where we have less than 32 appliances available. Now, so this doesn't panic or cause concern, our control staff continuously work to make sure that they move appliances around so that we have large density of population sites or significant areas of risk covered by appliances. And we are making interventions into our on-call availability through technology investment as well to try and increase the availability of these appliances. We're also, through training, providing interventions to change how we recruit and select people to try and reduce that time period, where it could take months sometimes. We're hoping that we can bring this down to weeks, if not even shorter than that, so that people will be attracted and come into the service far quicker. And of course, the more people we have within the system, the more appliance availability will increase. We have to note, of course, that this is also predominantly the main holiday season, and this has also been impacted by the COVID self-isolation. The NHS Test and Trace, which did take quite a large proportion of people out for a period. However, our average remains around 86% across the quarter, which is now starting to follow our 3-year average trend. Once again, on-call availability. We did see a drop within July, again linked to COVID and absences, dropped to a 76%. But this again is within our average quarterly availability. The on-call that I've just discussed there, and also changes that we're making to how our staff are available across duty systems, will start to have hopefully a positive impact on our availability. Figures which show us across these two slides what work is being undertaken. The key factor being that as the country opens up and people are returning to work, we are seeing an uplift in activity, and we'll continue to see that over the coming months. This work is aligned into our business continuity plan and our COVID roadmap for people to return to work. Crews are getting out there, they are engaging with the businesses, they are engaging with the public and increasing that activity. Again, and in relation to what the presentation we've just seen, predominantly around our key pillars of community safety, which include road safety, home safety, water safety, youth intervention. And you'll see that that is a growing trend now as to the work as we're providing those interventions. And they are specifically targeted. Particularly to note is, as we said there, around the water rescue, we're working towards the national strategy and engaging there, but it's a different message that we're delivering. We're tailoring the change in the public's environment and their activities to when they attend water or they are near sites. We're asking them to respect the environment they work in, and they're attending, as opposed to just don't attend these sites. Now, for road safety, we are aiming to support the speed management protocol and have that we deliver on behalf of the Road Safety Partnership. We're aiming to meet all public requests for logger deployment within the next 2 months, which of course will then feed back into the Community Safety Partnership, and then working with the police to see where we can have an intervention in reducing issues around road safety. Our youth and early intervention programmes have been relaunched, and since July we've run 2 live programmes, both delivered at Skipton and Northallerton. We've got the next one running at Colburn, with further in the year plan for Scarborough, Boroughbridge and York. So again, we're providing a larger intervention there because we have around 12 14 to 17-year-olds per course, which will have run within before the December period. We're also running a day in the life course, which is a shorter version of the life course, and that is in conjunction with the National Citizen Society. We're approximately 12 events with 60 young adults being delivered. And again, these are once again focusing on our core pillars of prevention and the collaborative outcomes that we're getting through community safety partnerships and road safety partnerships. The safe and well activity. This doesn't just relate to crews entering a premise and providing a safe and well check. This is the holistic approach, because this involves all our pre-call questionnaires, the pre-screening and the work and support we give, because some people don't want the fire service attendance. They take the advice, and we have a follow-up process into there. But it also demonstrates the increase in work we're doing around when we have had a fire, the immediate work that we do within that vicinity following that incident to try and prevent further fires, but also because people are aware, and it raises their attention, obviously, at the scene of a fire and the work we can do there. Our protection. So these are around our statutory duties and our specialist fire safety officers, and also our staff and the training that we've got. Once again, we've got a growing increase of work. across all areas. Guidance and advisory relates to our calls for advice from the public, from partner agencies when they enter a premise, if they see something and want to check on the regulations or whether there is an intervention required. Statutory and non-statutory work relates to consultations that we provide around buildings and also council and planning. And then our regulatory activity, which is our regulatory reform order duties under the Act to make sure that we are making businesses and premises safe for public and also for the employees within those buildings. Since lockdown, we're now seeing an increase in our work, but we are now at 95% of all consultation returns are completed within the deadline of 15 days, which is excellent. We did reinstate in April our the business inspection for premises, and to support this, we are running courses starting in September with 16 operational crew and watch managers on there, which will be trained to the level 3 certificate in fire safety. And this is bolstering our delivery of crews with specialist knowledge that can provide an immediate advice or intervention when they find an issue at an audit or following an incident. We're also expanding our work regionally and also within service. There was a recent high-rise exercise in Harrogate, and as part of that, we're developing the work we do to have risk information available for crews when they attend sites and partner agencies in the guise of a premises information pack. Now, this is part of national operational guidance. It's part of a movement nationally that we're looking to support and deliver. But it also, if we have attending crews coming from over the border, they're also able to access that information. Tactical information on what needs to be done at the scene, but also information on the safety, hydrants, locations, number of premises and the building layout. So it's a significant intervention for our safety and those of responding agencies. And that draws our performance to a close. I'll close that and take any questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Fire Officer. I do have a few questions for you. It's really around the on-call part of the operation. You've produced a sheet availability overview on on-call stations July 2021. Within here seems to be massed some horror, well, I wouldn't quite call them horror stories, but not great in terms of potential turnout. Kirby Moorside, for example, is below 60%. Tadcaster retained, I'm assuming that there's another Tadcaster. Oh, that's the inference that there's a day crew there as well. But Tadcaster retained is below 40%. Can you tell me what we're doing to address that in terms of having sufficient on-call crews available?
Yes, Commissioner, this Tadcaster does have a day crewed appliance there, but both appliances were also hit by the test and trace, and they were the stations that were significantly impacted across that period by crews physically not being available, having to self-isolate. Locally, we have a lot of management interventions where the watch managers are working, the station managers are working with the watch managers to make sure that they have a proactive approach to the staffing profile, looking to where possible, calling whole time or our on-call support crews to help staff those appliances. And if there are any long-term or indeed a significant number of short-term sicknesses, we look to transfer or move staff around to make sure that we're providing that provision. We wholeheartedly agree and understand that this is having an impact on the service and on the availability. We will, of course, always be able to mobilise an appliance, but this follows through from the Chief Officer's review into on-call availability to make sure now we take the steps necessary to provide the technology, the intervention for training and selection, and then the retention of staff to bring this to a level and maintain that sustainability of the on-call duty system.
Okay, yes, and I fully concur with you in terms of what we need to do. The other thing I wanted to ask you, which you haven't touched on, but the software that we use for alerting on-call firefighters, and so they can actually register their availability and non-availability. There has been some technical glitches with that. Has that now been resolved?
It hasn't. not fully. This is two computer software systems that we need to provide further investment into to make sure that it provides the level of provision that we need. That is part of the technological investment that the Chief has spoken about, and that's the first step and stage that we need to move this. We understand it has an impact, and that's what we're trying to remove. I'll just bring the Chief in on that point.
Thank you, Jonathan. Just to address the question as well, Commissioner, there's two parts to this. There's one is what Jonathan's just explained there in terms of the future investment in technology. There was a glitch with one of the system providers. That part of it has now been resolved. We're keeping a very watchful eye on there, because whenever there's an upgrade, it sort of creates another problem. So we will keep a very close monitor on that one. But yeah, I'm pleased to say that that particular element is fixed.
Okay, fine. That's reassuring. I think I'm going to open the floor up for colleagues who may have questions for you. Simon.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, so my question was about the data on false alarms. They're stubbornly high and rising, aren't they? So I just wondered if colleagues could expand a little bit more on current and planned work to reduce those occurrences.
Sorry, could I just add a supplement to what Simon's saying? So I think it's a very good point he makes. I understand that some other fire services actually have written to regular people who are setting off false alarms and told them that at the end of the year, after say a 12-month period or 6 months period, they're going to be analysed and will be charged for those false alarms. And apparently that's had a dramatic input in reducing them. So if you could work that into the answer as to whether you've considered that, and if not, whether you will consider that, I think would be useful.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Simon, you're right. They are, and we recognise that they are stubbornly high, and as an average and a large proportion. As part of the RRM, or the Risk and Resourcing Model Review, an internal change for us will be that we are doing a root and branch review of our response, our policy and our procedure to automatic fire alarms. We have to understand that a large proportion of those alarms are not wasted or unwanted fire signals. The 57% of those that relate to building risk or life risk, we will always attend. Albeit when we get there may be a reason why, but we will and we must have to attend those. The part of the unwanted fire signals that we want to reduce is around the automatic systems and the faults within those systems. And that's where our focus will be. Now, the review that we're doing, and we'll look at other agencies, and Commissioner, you're right, there are ways we can provide an intervention through to the businesses. Some services now charge from the first to the fourth call, which of course then does start to provide an immediate change. West Midlands utilise a model where they mobilise on blue lights fire safety business staff to the site instead of appliances. They will then provide an intervention or advice whilst they're there, which saves an appliance being mobilised. And then working with local businesses, and I'll just look to Andy Blade shortly. One of our highest areas for this is within the York District. Andy, do you have any specific examples in the York District where we've managed to reduce the number of calls?
Yes, the one I'd probably make reference to is along Heston Road, and that was a property which was a private care provider, and it had very complex needs in terms of the residents that are at that location. We were repeatedly attending that location for automatic fire alarm actuations, which were either system based, so faults in the systems that have just been explained, or on occasion where people with those complex needs were actually intentionally actuating the alarm system. When we actually looked into the detail, the funding for that organisation had been reduced significantly over a period of time. So their maintenance contracts had reduced, their staffing in terms of managing the people in that environment had reduced, and the system itself has just increased in terms of age. So really, North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service were carrying the burden for some of the failings or the funding limitations within that organisation manifesting into automatic fire alarms. So that was a coordinated response with ourselves, the business fire safety teams, and the owners and occupiers of that premises to understand that problem, but then give them an improvement plan, which put them in a place whereby those limitations that they had didn't result in those automatic fire alarm actuations. At the same time, recognising that the significant life risk in that premises was prevalent. So it was really important that, you know, we didn't make any shortcuts to the provision of fire safety around that building for the residents, but put the ownership back to the organisation to put the remedial actions into place. And that work has been successful in terms of an immediate reduction. The important thing now for us is that we don't see that as an individual piece of work. We maintain our understanding of that premises so that it doesn't start to revert back or creep back to a place where it's an issue again. And I think historically that might be something that we've done where we resolve the situation and then move focus to another place. And now it's about maintaining it. And that very much comes down to that district management team having that very pointed awareness of their risk in their district and understanding what the profile of automatic fire alarms is, so that they can put those interventions in place. And again, that goes back to the importance of the data, the real need for us to get that empirical data that gives us reports on a weekly, 3 monthly, 6 monthly, whatever that time frame is, to understand what that risk is predominantly, and then work with colleagues in business fire safety and premises to reduce that count on a significant and long-standing arrangement.
Thanks, Andy. Just to close on there, Commissioner, one point being that on the close of the review and also in line with the RRM, any changes to our mobilising protocols or where it would make a difference to businesses or commercial environment would be part of the consultation that we have with the public in that forum. So whilst this isn't an immediate fix, it's something we'll look to then obviously have a long and sustained approach to that we can deliver into the future RRMs as well.
Chief Fire Officer.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just to sort of support both Andy and Jonathan in their comments there, automatic fire alarms we recognise are a real issue for us in North Yorkshire. It's really our ambition now to drive these down by working with a range of different resources, but the review that Jonathan's talked about there is the key to getting that really implemented, and that's something which we will aim to get delivered over the next 12-month period.
Okay, fine. We look forward to progressing that further with the RRM. Does that answer your question, Simon?
Thanks. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Does anybody any further questions? No, good. Okay, well, we thank you for the report. It was comprehensive. There's a few things there sort of that just need attention, as we've touched on, and some of those things have been driven by forces beyond your control, like COVID, etc. But hopefully we'll see a settling down in terms of on-call and hopefully an improvement in turnout, but we will be monitoring that as we move forward. Right, the next item on the agenda is violence against a person. We've got a presentation from Superintendent Frank Norton, and just for those who remember, this came up about a couple of months ago. We saw some increases or a slight spike in figures as the lockdown was easing, and we asked North Yorkshire for more details and also, more importantly, what actions were being taken. I think you might be muted, Fran. You might just want to turn. If you can do anything, you can just about.
It's not muted.
That's better. You're louder now.
I'll just put my microphone slightly nearer. Bear with me. Can I just check it's been shared my screen?
It is. If you just want to put it on presentation mode, that's.
Just bear with me. It's catching up.
That's better. Brilliant.
That's okay. Okay. Thank you. I'm Fran Norton, Detective Superintendent at North Yorkshire Police, and just to discuss violent crime in North Yorkshire today. I want to touch on a few different areas that I think concern us and what we're trying to tackle most, in particular county lines, knife crime, domestic abuse we touched on, but I am conscious it was the life thematic as well, violence against women and girls, the nighttime economy, assault on emergency workers, and the forced performance and figures will be weaved through, and I'm conscious I'll just pick out the main points for you. Before I discuss anything, I suppose it's just useful to see what we're talking about in relation to violent crime. I think there's an array of offences there, perhaps more than you'd think, and perhaps more than the public realise are under this actual title of violent crime. And yes, you know, you would expect murder, we'd expect the assault, but actually things like controlling and coercive behaviour, perhaps newer legislation than some that does come under violent crime now. When you see the figures, they're incorporated as well. So this first slide that shows a difference as well between committed and recorded crime of historical crime. In particular, there's a difference in historical crime because if you think of a domestic abuse incident and being reported today, that's a physical report of abuse, but actually often the victims report old offences and a history of abuse, which encompasses harassment, encompasses controlling and coercive behaviour, tend to record more crimes at different dates. But generally speaking, they do follow roughly the same pattern, as you can see on these figures here. It does, violent crime does mean we have more historic crimes that's been recorded than other offences. If we see the data in relation to assault with and without injury first, and that accounts for over 23.5% of the crimes recorded in North Yorkshire. The 3-year data and 12-month data generally quite consistent with the just over 12% with assault without injury, around 11% with assault with injury on the 3 and 12-month data. And in the 90-day data, increasing amounts with 28% being the amount of violence against the person recorded. But if we look at the 16 months of COVID, there were 2,064 fewer crimes in that COVID period of 16 months, which I don't think would be a surprise to anybody, given the sort of less opportunity to be interacting with people, less mobility, less potential for violence and for crimes being recorded. And they're just depicted again on a graph, really, again showing that we're dipping in the amount of crime we had as we went into lockdown and people couldn't move about and couldn't interact with people, and rising just after we come out of each lockdown. Again, seeing the more significant rises in the last as we come out of the last lockdown. Again, they both mirror roughly the same patterns as going up. If I come on to just first to talk about county lines, really, and how we tackle county lines, there's such a close link between county lines and violence. But I do think we're quite aware of that in North Yorkshire Police and are doing everything we can to tackle that. We are an importing force, so that means we're one of the smaller forces where the criminals come in generally from bigger areas, from larger cities into the smaller towns and commit their drug dealing. And when we say lines, about the phone lines, but we have done a lot to tackle this. In the last 12 months, we've taken down 6 county lines, and that means completely obliterated those drug dealing lines into North Yorkshire. And then we've disrupted another 13, so significantly got these drug dealers off track and made it an unfavourable place to drug deal in North Yorkshire. Many of the tactics are overt, when the public will see us stopping vehicles and potentially searching people and looking for drugs. But in order to take lines down and really disrupt longer term, we do use covert tactics, which obviously I won't go into today, but just reassuring that there is a lot going on behind the scenes to tackle these serious organised crime gangs and to prevent the violence and to reduce that violence coming into North Yorkshire. There are national county lines weeks of action. This is just an example of the last one. As you can see, 20 arrests, lots of welfare visits, lots of different drugs seized and cash often seized, 10,000 in this case. And we support those weeks of action, which are throughout the year. We've introduced the Blue Guardian principles, which came into play in South Wales. But actually, I think we've got a good understanding of Cuckooing in the force, which is when the drug dealers target a vulnerable person, generally say a drug user or someone with mental health issues. They take over that property and start drug dealing from that property. But it's important that we identify those properties, identify those people be in those properties, and look after them and try and prevent them from being vulnerable to the drug dealers. And it's just to reassure as well that we do, although we're an importing force, we're not ignored. We do readily bid for the county lines funding to pursue activity, to take more lines down and disrupt. And we exploit all the opportunities we can in these national funding bids, which we've done on each occasion. And just really an example of a month in the life of the county expedite team. The expedite team are our proactive team that in the main target county lines. And I think just a snapshot of 18 arrests, several amounts of cash seized, cocaine, cannabis. But the important thing just to note is what's been seized on the weapons, the flick knives, the replica handguns, the air rifles, and a large hunting knife. And this is why there's such a close link between county lines and violence, and why we need to tackle county lines. These are various different arrests where people have had the weapons, and the people we arrest do tend to have a weapon of some sort to either threaten other gangs or just for their own protection when they're drug dealing. There was some good sentences on this occasion, one for drug driving and one for possession and intent to supply. But what's really important at the bottom is the welfare visits as well, which I always look at to make sure we're having significant amounts of safeguarding and welfare visits. And again, these are generally to our cuckooing victims to make sure we do put the referrals in to try and prevent them being victims in the future, prevent them being victims of violence. And again, the intelligence reports that go with that. So closely linked to it is knife crime, and I bring knife crime up just in particular on this slide. There's lots of different offences listed, but just to highlight, yes, there has been an increase in violence with a knife being used, the bladed instrument being the one that's normally used, but really here just highlighting that our last 4 murders have involved a knife to cause the injury and to cause the death. So, which is why we have the focus and why we have the importance on knife crime in the force. I just go on to show really again there about the assault with and without injury involving knife crime, again roughly following the same patterns. But interestingly, in lockdown, we have still seen the spikes coming out of lockdown. Potentially, this could be gang related and gangs being able to the organised crime gangs being able to operate again and using knives. But again, these are array of offences which also include domestic abuse, which will include mental health issues as well, which we know have also been significant during the COVID times. And then I just highlight the possession of weapons in particular. I think our target has got to be on stopping people carrying weapons in the first place, so that again they can't go on to commit the crime or what goes behind that. It's important we're proactive in some of the results I've just shown you and focus on people that are carrying knives. We know we've identified those who we believe are carrying knives through intelligence, and we need to stop them. The numbers have been generally quite consistent over the last 3 years: 321, 362, 326. Roughly the same, but you'll just see that slight dip from sort of March, April, where we're pushing that down, and I don't think that's because we're not looking, because you can see the great results the expedite team have had. I think that's because we are really focusing on stopping people that we believe are in possession of those weapons, searching them and having these good results and taking the knives and the weapons off the street. And again, the possession of the weapons crime, again, just broken down there, that, mainly we're talking about a bladed article here, a bladed knife or a point. Again, roughly the same, 61% over the 3 and the 12-month data, a little bit more in the 90 data. Again, it covers things like firearms in here, but just to reassure, that also covers the likes of the air weapons we were talking, the BB guns, not all the firearms you may think. And I think it's just important to know what is behind the carrying of these weapons. And sadly, intelligence tells us that it is young people, generally 16 to 25, whether that be to protect themselves, whether it be peer pressure for young people, thinking they're safer to carry a knife, which we know is far from the truth. A lot of these offences relate to, robberies or drugs taxings, and the two are going together. In relation to gang-related offences. So again, in the main, these are talking about knives, but yes, we have seen some intelligence reports mentioning machetes as well, which again, the reason for focusing on knife crime. So just what we're doing about this, we support the National Operations Sector Weeks of Action, which are twice a year, which focus on enforcement and prevention. We do things like working with trading standards, where there's, say, test purchase operations in retail premises to make sure they're not being sold to young people or inappropriately when knives are sold. We look at school education and making the young people realise that carrying a knife isn't the right thing to do and is actually far from being the safest thing to carry a knife. We work with Border Force as well. The Border Force, there are some lawful purchases of knives across the border, but actually some look suspicious. And we actually go and do visits to the people's houses where we think there's been a suspicious purchase. One of the last ones we did, one young person had ordered 3 knives for him and his friends, and we managed to intervene, take those knives and discuss that with the family and prevent any crime happening, which is exactly what that works for. I chair a local operational working group in the force, which again looks at the governance, the consistent practice across the force, and sharing good practice and supporting these weeks of action. Some of that working group looks at enforcement to check that operational disarm, we call it, where we're targeting these habitual knife crime carriers. So the people that are most likely to be carrying these knives. So when our officers go out, they know who they should be targeting, who are the likely people that are carrying these knives. But we also share that with partners and exchange that information of what our partners know about that, so that they can assess their risk if they're dealing with these people as well, but also share information back if we can do anything more to target these offenders and take these weapons off the street. Again, there's a heavy focus on prevention, and Operation Divan is our strand of prevention in relation to knife crime. It's intelligence-led, where any piece of intelligence in relation to a child or young person carrying a knife, we will go and visit that person, talk about the risks and consequences with their parents, with an adult. This is in relation to under 18s, and the hope that they realise, again, not being the right thing to do. And what we found from that is that only 8% of children have actually gone on to reoffend after we've made an intervention and after we've been involved. The College of Police now have actually done some evidence base on this, which has been shared across the country, and it's looked at as national good practice. So we continue with Operation Divan, and again, so important given the fact that I said that the 16 to 25 age group is that core age group for knife crime. I move on just to violence against women and girls, which again, there's a lot of data there again, but the 3 12-month and 90 data are thereabouts in relation to sort of 53 to 58. Under 58% in relation to the offences that are committed against women and girls. Just the next slide as well shows obviously the amount of offences, and probably in line with the increasing in the last 90 days that the other data shows. And I think the important thing here though is not the numbers, it's more the service we provide to women and girls reporting to North Yorkshire Police. We need to provide an excellent service to those who do report, so that other victims have confidence to come forward. We need to share our results on sentences so that, again, they have confidence in reporting, and listen to our victims and make sure we adhere to the victims code, listen to what our victims want from reporting to the police. I could just come on to the next slide of a couple of areas of where we need to make sure we are using all the protective measures, as well as bail, that we're using all the tools that we can possibly use. The Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme is just such an excellent scheme and can empower women. It's not just for women, but again, when we talk about for women and girls, can empower women to, I suppose, take control of their lives and get some information on their partner, who could be a perpetrator, who could be a previous perpetrator, and so that they can make a decision about their relationship. We've had significant increases in the use of this, obviously, from when it started for nothing in 2014 up to 561 in 2020. And 2 routes into this, obviously, the person can ask for a disclosure, but also we can disclose on their behalf with the information we've got as well to make sure they're safe in the future. So I just think this is such an excellent scheme that has just showed some great results, and 81% of reduction in domestic abuse after we've disclosed this. So a decision's been made to make that person safe, whether we've intervened or the person's asked us, and we've shared that information. And likewise, domestic violence protection orders are such a useful tool that we consider on each and every case, and where applicable, apply for a domestic violence protection order, which I call a breather, a 28-day breather, where again we can get other partners involved and we can put other interventions in place so that we can prevent further violence. I haven't gone into any more domestic abuse because I am conscious it was on the July agenda. So I've just moved on now to public order offences, which are not actually classed as violent crime. But the reason I thought it was important just to give a snapshot of this is to show really that we need to be on the ball with public order offences. You can see the increase there as we've come out of lockdown, in particular on the last lockdown, about the increase in offences. We know that happens when, we're coming out of restrictions generally, but again, in the summer heat waves, we've had the Euros, all this potentially adding to an increase in public order offences. But I think the important thing here is that we address low-level criminality. We are on top of it, and that we take positive action in order to prevent something serious more happening, and that they don't become violent crime offences in the first place. And again, working with our CCTV operators that are excellent at alerting us to potential violence or potential public order offences, so we can get on top of them at the earliest stage. Which brings me on to sort of the nighttime economy and a lot of work that's going on in relation to tackling offences that occur in the nighttime economy, and various initiatives between licensing and the neighbourhood policing teams. All incidents involving domestic abuse are reviewed by licensing officers to prevent crime and disorder. There's a welfare and vulnerability engagement, which is WAVE, which has been training for partners, the local authority staff, SIA staff to marshals, and that's just encouraging partners to report concerns just at the earliest opportunity. We have community alcohol partnership, which is protecting young people from alcohol-related harm, targeting in particular underage drinking. There's the Ask for Angela scheme that we've relaunched, again, which is that trigger to receive help from bar staff. If we ask for Angela in the name, then if somebody feels unsafe in their situation and they need staff to be aware and to intervene, they can mention that. And that's something that continually needs refreshing as different staff in these nighttime economies change in the pubs and the bars, so that they're aware of that. And obviously that's only as good as both the public and the partners being aware of it, so constantly needs refresh. There's pub watch schemes as well, where there's information sharing across the 8 licensing authorities in relation to pub watches and who to look out for and who's barred from pubs. There's an awareness of top 50 premises who have the most calls for service, and why is that, and questioning why that is, and have they got all the right processes in place. And the review between the police and the local authority and any interventions that are required in those. We're about to introduce the Licensing and Security and Vulnerability Initiative, SAVI for short, which is due to be rolled out, which again is a self-assessment tool for bars, clubs, to have more effective management practices, and give them practical examples of what's right, what's a good way of a bar or a club to operate, and to follow the 4 licensing objectives of prevention of crime and disorder and public safety, etc. I think that's more important as well. As new staff, we're seeing new staff in all these different premises after COVID, as we know they're struggling to staff various premises and people have moved and things. So that's just touching on probably an array of activity in the nighttime economy to tackle the violent crime in the nighttime. Moving on to violent crime assaults on constables. This has increased. So whilst I've been talking about much crime reducing during COVID, we actually have seen an increase in assaults without injury on constables, which is obviously unacceptable, and could be for a range of offences which are probably still unclear, but they are shown there in the figures. Although they are relatively still low, nothing is acceptable. Also, the assaults on emergency workers, they have doubled, they've increased by 200%, actually more than doubled, to 18 crimes in the last 12 months. They are very low numbers, thankfully, but again, nothing acceptable when we've got our emergency services coming to the public's aid. And then I suppose it's what we're doing about that. Well, we're part of Operation Hampshire, which is the national operation to look at consistency, best practice, and the well-being of our staff across all the agencies to do the best job we can and the best service we can. There's been legislative changes. I mean, firstly, the Assaults and Emergency Worker Act of 2018 itself, the Act itself in a separate charge is, a significant, whereas before we'd have charged for just a common assault or something that perhaps wasn't as appropriate to have the actual focus on the charge itself. And then the current 12 months maximum sentence or fine, but hopefully soon increasing to the 2-year imprisonment would hopefully be a good a good positive move, and hopefully show it's not acceptable to commit these offences. The police and CPS work together in a joint framework to get the right investigation, to get the right prosecutions. Obviously, these offences are often tagged on or alongside other offences as well. But again, we now work to a joint framework to get those right charges and right outcomes. We know there's a victim personal statement that the Chief Constable adds to the files, the investigation, to say the significance of what people have done, and so that the courts understand for sentencing. And I believe, Commissioner, you'd like to be part of that as well, to be part of those statements, which I think is a great message for our staff as well, to know how supportive they are and that to know how unacceptable this practice is for their aid. And then just lastly, the officer safety training does go from 2 days to 3. Which is College of Policing officer safety training does increase early next year. I think it's important that our officers know how to deal with danger, but also know how to de-escalate a situation, how to actually make sure that it doesn't escalate in the first place. Actually, is what the position we would like to be in as the police and other emergency workers. Just move on to outcomes. 15.25% are resolved positively on all violence offences across the force. The other areas that where we struggle are for prosecution reasons. So just over 21% are where we may have the victim might be on board, but the other evidence is lacking. Despite our efforts, we can't actually get sufficient to get that to a charge stage. The higher amount is the one you can see where it says the victim reasons, so 50.39% where the victim declines to support. We've already got a suspect on those cases, but actually it is really difficult without a victim supporting the case to get that charge. We do look at evidence-led prosecutions, so we do look at the possibilities with getting a positive outcome without the victim on board, but it can make it difficult when they could be the focal point of getting that charge and getting us to court. Some of the offences are closed on there when you see the colour codes, and the blue in the charts are awaiting outcome, which you see are slightly more to the right hand side of the charts because they're the more current offences. So 7.68 just still under investigation, where we still hope to make some positive outcomes on those investigations. I'll move on to I suppose the challenges for us in dealing with violent crime. And I suppose it's balancing really our reactive demand and our proactivity. So we need to balance the calls for service, making sure we do get to the members of the public and get to the various different calls of service, but also balancing that with managing to put our proactive expedite teams, as we call them, out on the street, knowing that they can make such significant arrests and take weapons off the street. It's managing those two things together and being able to deliver both things really, which is a challenge. But I think the proactivity is so important not to lose that, as you've seen from the earlier results. The young workforce is a challenge, or should I say a newer workforce. We have got a significant amount of student officers, which all take obviously tutoring. Things can take longer to explain. Our training is good for officers, but obviously sometimes you can't beat some experience of dealing with the different sorts of violent situations. And I suppose that comes into the increase in officer assaults potentially. If you haven't dealt with a situation and go into it, you may not deal with it the best and the first time. It might be you're not swift enough with the arrest and putting the handcuffs on and get assaulted. But there could be lots of different reasons for that. But again, just I suppose when you grow in experience, potentially you can be better perhaps at assessing the situation and perhaps de-escalating something before it happens. I think the views with society, facts have changed on violence. Increasing social media, where it's quite easy to threaten on social media and be a violent offence without sort of stepping out of the door. A bit more potential acceptance on what's graphic and sort of the glorification of knives, mentioning sort of that knives have been carried for peer pressure, self-defence, and perhaps people thinking that's okay, or thinking they're safer carrying a knife, which is obviously far from the truth, and how we change those views. There is a national shortage of detectives, and that's no different in North Yorkshire. We've got a gap of 27 officers out of our core detectives, 2 detectives of 160. A quarter of those are trainee detectives, constables as well. So again, whilst they're all very good, they all take the mentoring, take a bit longer perhaps to do things if you haven't done them plenty of times before. So it's just over time getting them to speed sufficiently. And then the different criminal justice requirements, the significant changes in the disclosure requirements and what we need to hand over to CPS at an earlier stage. So it's adjusting to those really. And again, we may get used to those, but it is a significant amount of work and significant changes where we have to provide lots of information prior to even a charge for violent offences or for any offence really. So there are a few of the challenges I feel we currently face. But just coming on to, I suppose, the strengths and the opportunities we do have. Again, these focus on young people really, because we've seen, again, that's where we think our challenges lie and where a lot of the violent crime or potential violent crime could come from. We've got to stop people getting into the violent crime or the potential for this in the first place or being vulnerable to it. The Stepping Up project is a sports project provided by North Yorkshire Sport that we are working with them. They had 80 referred at the last count, and it's not just putting them into football, perhaps as traditionally we would have done. It's actually sort of that mentoring them, that real one-to-one of what they need, and then try and directing them to a sport that can sort of change their lives and get them really into something that's not violence and nothing to do with crime, which has had a really successful start, but again is in its infancy really, but doing really well. The change direction provided by North Yorkshire Youth, again where there's dedicated key workers. I know that's funded by the Commissioner's Office, and again it's engagement on a voluntary basis, but again just getting that turnaround of attitudes and getting the young people engaged and making them part of it. Triage and diversion, again, sort of a similar concept, looking at with young people, provided by York Youth Justice. And another recent Operation Choice, which is with regards to drugs possession and substance misuse. Rather than a criminal justice option, there is an option to direct them to an educational outcome, which again, it's in its infancy, but has been seen to work in Thames Valley. And it's good practice that we are taking from them and hopefully going to be successful with. So there are a few of the youth projects. Just some other work that's ongoing. Project Alliances are our partnership approach where we tackle serious organised crime, but obviously the violence weaves into all that, as we've mentioned, with the county lines and knife crime. We have quarterly meetings with our SOC partners and how to best tackle this and educate each other about what's going on and what's new. We encourage then our partners to give us that intelligence. What is that picture? The EAT is, apologies for the acronym, Early Action Together project, but looking at our intelligence systems and making that more user friendly for both our own staff and for partners' contribution to it as well. I mentioned earlier that we share information in relation to knife crime and young people and knife crime, and that is, that's going really, really well. So it's things like that that we're encouraging. As part of the officer uplift, we would like to increase our Operation Expedite footprint across the force. We have the teams across the force, but we would like to expand them because of the evidence we've seen and some of the results I've shown here. There's other areas that we can exploit as well. There's excellent new legislation in the Offensive Weapons Act 2019, where before we'd have gone into a house and we might have seen a flick knife or a knuckle duster, and believe it or not, that wasn't unlawful if the person had it inside their house. But the law's now changed, and it now is unlawful, and then would warrant, a charge with that. So often we'd be, when we're looking at things like the drug dealing and the county lines, where we're often finding these type of weapons in houses, we now have that legislation that supports it, which is excellent. And we've yet to see how much we can use that, but I think that will be well used. And then we have the Prevent Board as well, where the Contest Board, where again, identifying extremism at the earliest opportunity so that we can intervene and prevent violent crime at the earliest opportunity. I've talked about North Yorkshire and looking inwards of what we're doing, but I think it's just important to show a little bit about other forces as well and where we sit with it compared to other forces. Again, this data is in relation to the Office of National Statistics last data from December, and it does show that we have the lowest ratio of crime for the overarching violence against the person, 19.6% per 1,000 population. But we're also the lowest category for all of the subcategories except the violence without injury. So I do think, it's good to see these other forces are the most similar when you look at them, sort of the demographic, the social and economic characteristics. So we're not comparing ourselves to the West Midlands or anything. We're comparing ourselves to the most like forces and still come out as the safest county when you look at those figures. And I suppose just to round off, really, from everything I've discussed, we hope that we will reduce violent crime further. We want to reduce those possession of weapons in the first place, so that again, people don't have the opportunities to use those weapons in, even more serious crime and go on to use them. We do still encourage domestic abuse reporting. I still believe there will be hidden crime post COVID. And perhaps still we want people to know that we are here to listen and to be there for them and deal with the domestic abuse that they may report. And would like to increase those positive outcomes for violent crime, again adhering to the Victims Code and seeing if we can reduce those amount of people are not sticking with us for the duration of the investigation, increase those positive outcomes. And lastly, to maintain this North Yorkshire as the status of the safest county. We're not complacent at all, but I'm hoping I've showed some of the activity that is ongoing where we can, maintain that and give confidence to the public. Thank you.
Wow, that was one very comprehensive report. Thank you very much, Fran. I have a few questions arising from that, and in no particular order. You said, I think, with the presentation that violence against women and girls was roughly around 57%, I think, as a figure. Obviously, that's a high figure. We are, which I think you acknowledge in the report, we're putting together, which is the first strategy for North Yorkshire and York, a violence against women and girls strategy that will form part of the police and crime plan. We're currently accepting evidence, as you know, that's will then go out to public consultation and become part of the police and crime plan in the new year. For some people that can't come round soon enough. In terms specifically of protecting sort of women and girls, is there anything further that you could actually say that would help them? Because obviously 57% is quite, it's a very high figure.
I think it's just realising that, when we have that report, that we look at all the potential tools available to us. So, we'd like to think we have some criminal justice outcomes. That's not always what the victim wants or what the woman or the girl wants when they're reporting that to the police. But just knowing that reporting it to us in the first place, that they have the confidence to report that, and seeing that we can follow that through the criminal justice system. There are bail conditions that we can put to protect victims, but some of those other things about the domestic violence protection orders, the Clare's law, as it's informally known, they're the important things we just need to consider for every person that comes forward. Look at them as individuals about what are the tools we've got to make that person safe, really, and what do they want the outcome to be. So I think I do have to have some sort of individual approach as well to what people want when they're reporting to us.
Yeah, indeed, and we will also be coming back with further measures and things which we'll be announcing later. Do you also want to touch on the pharmacist arrangement? I think it's Ask Annie, isn't it, where you can actually go into a pharmacist and ask basically to report domestic abuse and seek guidance for pharmacists that are participating.
Do you mean it's like similar to the Ask Angela? Sorry, yes. But
yes, it's similar.
Yeah.
It's Ask Annie, I think, and it's geared around the pharmacists.
Yeah, so I think it's just that really. Again, it's making sure educating, I suppose, the public that they can ask and they have ability to ask and disclose to somebody. Again, somebody that's not necessarily the police, just giving opportunities where they can disclose something where they can get help. And that's not always necessarily the police, a bit like the Ask Angela. If they're feeling in a dangerous position and they're in a bar, then the nearest person is the bar, the person working behind the bar and not the police. So again, and similar to, if you go into a pharmacy, it might be that they're the nearest person that you can disclose something to, that you can get help. So it's just giving, I suppose, victims options and giving more partner agencies some responsibility and helping us really to protect victims, potential victims.
Okay, thank you. This will obviously be a key part of the police and crime plan. That's the reason I'm flagging it up. Can I ask you how many, you quoted the number of county lines gangs that have been taken down. Do you have a figure for the current active number of county lines in North Yorkshire?
I want to say 13. Yeah, so those ones are the ones we've been taking down over the year, but obviously it fluctuates. So the number of county lines are different from the number of organised crime gangs we have. Yes. So we roughly have about 13. Normally it fluctuates between about 10 and 13 county lines at any one time. I'd have to just double check my figures, but I think we're on 13 at the moment. But again, that is slightly different from the organised crime groups, which is a different, figure, which incorporates more than just county lines as well.
Okay. And do you think we should be having a amnesty for weapons? I'm particularly thinking knives, but for that matter, guns and air rifles.
Yeah, well, that has happened quite recently. So just before the knife legislation that I mentioned, there was the surrender scheme before that. So, and that was really the government-led initiative to actually give people the opportunity that, look, hand over these knives. If you've got them, you actually won't be prosecuted. So just before this legislation came in, people did have that opportunity to hand some of these weapons in, to some of the firearms in. So that has been given quite recently and is also revisited at the Operation Sceptre weeks that I mentioned. That is often revisited, and we have surrender weeks on those weeks where you can come into the police station and hand over an knife or a weapon.
Fine. Thank you. I'm going to open it up now to the floor. Anybody, any questions they'd like to ask, Fran? Simon?
Just one from me, and it's on the county lines topic that you've just highlighted there, Philip. Fran, you mentioned an initiative called Operation Guardian or Blue Guardian. That's an initiative from elsewhere in the country that we're adopting, is it? And could you just expand a little bit more on what that's all about?
Yeah, I mean, it's roughly what we're doing already, but it's just they have a little bit more structured. So it's from South Wales, the Blue Guardian, say, principles. So it's more like a community safety approach. So really, we're doing some of that anyway. So in relation to, say, cuckooing addresses, we also currently share that with the ambulance service, the fire service, and we share that of what a vulnerable address is. So, for example, the ambulance service is now, once we share that, they put markers on those addresses so they have awareness when they're going there. Well, partly, obviously, there's a potential risk, of course, but also to share intelligence back, potentially in relation to county lines and cuckooing. So it's that type of thing, which, to be honest, we've already got, perhaps more loosely, but we're going to go firmer with the Blue Guardian principles of their own.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? If not, we'll move on. Great. Okay, thank you ever so much, Superintendent, and we'll move on to the Chief Constable now, who's going to give us an update, I think, on North Yorkshire Police performance update.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I'll just share the screen. Okay, hopefully that's come up.
It has, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay then, so I'll move into performance for North Yorkshire Police over this reporting period then. And the first part again, as per usual, is around public contact for our performance around 3-9's calls. And again, I think you can see the volumes of calls that we've had presented so far over the rolling 12-month period for 3-9's, and our in terms of answering within 10 seconds, we've answered around about 47,000, just under 47,500 of those calls, which equates to 53.5%. And then obviously there's 43.65% outside of the agreed SLA of 10 seconds. So in the 30 days since the last reporting period for us, the average for our answering of 3-9's calls was 22 seconds, which again has reduced from 26 seconds in the previous period. Now, again, it's for us, it's we want to get a lot better at that. And I think the challenge for us has been balancing against the volume increase in 3-9's that we're receiving, certainly since the easing of lockdown restrictions, versus some of the staffing challenges we've got in the control room. So we've got Assistant Chief Constable Butterfield, who is holding weekly goal meetings in relation to the performance in the force control room in terms of call answering times and dispatching. And again, that's for both 999s and 101s. And again, Commissioner, we are grateful to the additional financial support that's been made available to help us in the short term in relation to the peak time over the summer period. But also in addition to that, we are developing medium and longer term plans around our force control room, the investment in technology, investment in staffing, shift patterns, etc., to make sure that we can improve our performance in these areas. Again, moving forward for 101s, again, you can see the volume of calls that's been presented for us over this period of time. So 61,000, just under 61,500 answered within under 2 minutes, and around 65,000 outside of that SLA again. So we want to continue to push forward in relation to that. The calls abandon rate, although that's shown at 22.8%, what I want to probably stress in relation to the abandonment rates, again, that is not that people have hung up and decided not to report anything. Again, there's further work ongoing in relation to breaking that down. That could be that somebody has called us during a peak time. There might have been an accident on the A1, or there might have been a significant incident running where we've got lots of 999 calls coming in. Again, that member of the public, again, we're checking, will usually ring back during quieter time to get that answered, or they may elect for a queue buster call, which is where we will ring them back within a set period of time as soon as we get a call handler that's freed up. So again, the 22.8% doesn't indicate that they are abandoned calls that are never dealt with by North Yorkshire Police. So again, I think that's something that we will be aiming to present that data broken down to you in more detail going forward once that's available. So in the last 30 days, for us, call answering for 101s was just under 5 minutes, which is approximately 90 seconds longer than the average it was in the previous 12 months. So again, it's again, that forms part of the work that ACC Butterfield is doing to look at how we can achieve that service level agreement for us of around 2 minutes answering times in relation to 101s. So with regards to our response, so I know there are those challenges with regards to answering our call handling times. In terms of this page relates to how quickly we are getting officers to the scenes of incidents. So essentially what we are looking at is the response times for officers attending immediate grade. So those are the ones where actually there's a crime in action, there's a threat to somebody's safety. It's those type of 999 calls, your road traffic collisions where people have been injured. So in these calls here, what we're seeing is it's an average of 11 minutes and 51 seconds. So from the time that the force control room dispatch an officer to an immediate grade, the time of arrival at that incident, the average time is 11 minutes 51 seconds for those officers. And that's in rural locations. So given the expanse of North Yorkshire and the geography that we've got, that's 11 minutes in our rural locations. In our urban locations, it's down to 7 minutes 56 seconds. So in under 8 minutes, we will have officers at the scene in urban areas, and in under 12 minutes, we'll have them at the scene in rural areas. So again, versus the previous policing pledge statistics, those are significantly under the service level agreements that were nationally agreed under the previous policing pledge. So in relation to the leading time from taking the call, again for us it's adding on around an average of around about 4 minutes 41 seconds. So in terms of answering the call, handling the call, and then dispatching an officer, that takes on average 4 minutes 41 seconds. So again, you can see the two correlated together make up the incident arrival times for our officers in both rural and urban locations. So broken down at the bottom of that page, it also shows our priority grades for our incidents as well. So these priority grades for us are where there isn't that threat to somebody's safety, isn't necessarily an immediately ongoing crime in action, or a road traffic incident where somebody has been injured. It's these are the incidents actually where there isn't a requirement for officers to activate blue lights and two tones to provide an emergency response. So again, the times for those are broken down, and the types of incidents that we're attending, you can see are broken down there. So they're your antisocial behaviour incidents, some of your crime incidents there, and the PSW is public safety and welfare. And you can see from those type of incidents, the public safety and welfare is a significant amount of demand on North Yorkshire Police in terms of numbers of incidents, but actually the time it takes to resolve an incident once you're there. You can see that for us, we're spending more time dealing with crime. So whilst crime forms a lower amount of our calls for service, it does take up more time. So again, when we're building our response model going forward and utilising our uplift in officers through the rise from the government, again, we'll be taking into account not just the number of calls for service, but also the time it takes for officers to deal with the various types of incidents once they arrive. So in terms of volumes of general crime, so I know Fran has gone through in terms of violent crime, but again, there are several categories of crime that we have to report back to the Home Office on. And again, our 3-year data would show that around 65% of our crime falls into the categories of violence, which Fran has covered off against the violence against the person, theft or arson, and for us, criminal damage. So again, that's the predominant picture in North Yorkshire over the last 3 years worth of data. So over the last 12 months, what we've seen is there's a trend that we've seen an increase in public order offences and fraud. So again, during the nighttime, during COVID and the lockdown restrictions, we have seen an increase in fraud type offences. So that is criminals adapting their model as they can't go out and commit acquisitive crimes such as shoplifting and other offences, that we are seeing more types of fraud type offences come to fruition where they are trying to defraud the public into handing over money or possessions as a result of fraudulently claiming, for example, that they are offering COVID vaccine tests for sale, the lateral flow tests and others for sale. We were seeing fraudulent activity in those sorts of areas. So there's been an increase as a result of COVID. And then the public order offences that we've seen increasing, as Fran has alluded to, this is showing where lockdown restrictions have eased and we are seeing the public coming back together in public spaces, the opening up of the nighttime economy, the increase in those type of offences. Again, we've got fewer members of the public that have gone abroad on holiday. We've got people working from home. We've got our young people off from school on holidays. So there's a pretty perfect storm of a mix, really, where we've got more members of the public engaging together, more nighttime economy sectors opening up that are increasing our public order offending in our communities across North Yorkshire. So again, what we're also seeing now over the last 90 days is that the committed amounts of crime that we're seeing now are more similar to pre-pandemic levels. So what we're seeing is actually officers still dealing with some of the effects of the COVID legislation, having to deal with those, but also now crime levels are starting to return to pre-pandemic levels. So again, the demand levels on North Yorkshire Police in relation to those, and we've seen the increase through our force control room in the numbers of things being reported. Again, not just crime related, but also non-crime related, that demands are going up at this moment in time. So over the last 12 months, you can see here from the slides that we've got the top slide indicates when a crime was committed. So again, you can see that whilst both graphs follow a similar pattern, when you can see where lockdown takes place, you see the drops in crime, and when lockdown is eased, you start to see the rise in crimes coming to fruition. What you see in the bottom graph is when a crime was recorded. So actually what we're seeing here is whilst crime committed, actually committed during that time and date has dropped by 5.42%. What we're seeing here is when crime has been reported has increased by just over 1%. Now what that means is that we've got members of the public who are reporting more historical crimes to us. So again, there's been lots of work done from North Yorkshire Police around building those trust and confidence in getting victims of historical crimes to come forward to North Yorkshire Police and report that. So predominantly that will be historical sexual offending or violent crimes. Again, even historical domestic offending reporting to North Yorkshire Police. There's been a drive for us to build confidence and trust with our communities to ensure that is the case. So you can see from the two graphs there that actually the difference there for us in historical crime being reported, which for us is just as important to provide a service to those victims of crime who haven't had that confidence to come forward in the past.
Okay.
So in terms of September's public accountability, this slide just highlights, Commissioner, the ask that you've set for us around scrutiny around rural crime. So again, these are the questions that we're looking to answer for you at the next public accountability meeting. So I'll move on from that slide if it's okay.
Yep.
And again, the victim's journey with the victim code changing. Again, this is how we're seeking to provide that reassurance to our victims of crime in North Yorkshire, and how we will build a framework around these key areas and report back to yourself as well in relation to how we are performing in relation to keeping our victims updated and providing that victim service. Again, there is further work for us to do in North Yorkshire Police, which will be led again by our superintendents and heads of function to make sure that victims are receiving the appropriate service through the Victims Code. Again, we'll report on that as that one continues to be developed.
Okay.
So use of force, again, this particular slide talks about the category of age and gender as well when we look into this. So the gender profile for our stop and search over the last 12 months, what we've seen is actually the breakdown of our stop and search profile broadly mirrors the breakdown of what our gender profile is for those committing crime in our communities in North Yorkshire. So again, the proportion of females being stopped and proportion of males being stopped is proportionate to the profile of our offenders in North Yorkshire. So again, whilst we understand, the profile of female to male across North Yorkshire is broadly 50-50, that does not reflect our offender profile. So again, when we are looking at how ethically we are utilising our use of force powers, especially in our stop and search powers, we're really keen to understand actually what's the offender profile that we are doing that in. So it isn't just about the community profiles, it's also about who is committing crime in those communities and what is the profile of those individuals committing crime in our communities. That will ensure that our stop and search and other powers that are being used legitimately and are being used through an intelligence-based approach. So again, at the bottom, you can see the positive outcome rates and the national average is just under 20% for positive outcome rates. So again, North Yorkshire Police, using that intelligence-based approach, is above the national average. Again, we'll work really hard to continue to see if we can keep that positive outcome rate rising higher. But again, at the moment, we are above national average in relation to positive outcomes for stop and search. So our workforce data going forward again. So again, looking at the Operation Uplift, which is the rise of 20,000 officers across the UK. Again, North Yorkshire Police has a recruitment profile that we are working to. That is fluctuating. Again, there are challenges within the recruitment of police officer numbers at the moment. We will be impacted by the outcome of the pensions challenge and the pension remedy that will come from central government, again, on our officer retirement profile. So again, we may see more officers retiring from the service as a result of that pension remedy than we were anticipating. So again, that legislation and guidance is expected this financial year. And once that's confirmed, we'll be able to look to profile what that retirement loss will look like to North Yorkshire Police. But again, for us, we have got a new intake of student officers coming in September 2021. We are currently recruiting transferees, both uniform and detective, at this moment in time. So again, the numbers of where we want to be, we think we're going to have to review in line with the pensions profile, and we may need to put on an additional recruitment campaign within this financial year to ensure that we continue to meet the targets for the National Uplift programme. Our PCSOs, as you can see from the slide, is above our FTE target and budgeted target of 221. We're currently sitting at 222. And again, we will be releasing a new PCSO campaign over this financial year because we'll anticipate some of our PCSOs will be successful in transferring across to police officer numbers, which again, transferring their skills across will be really valuable to us, and we'll look to bring in new PCSOs as a result of that investment. Specials and volunteers, again, we'll continue to push out campaigns in relation to those and work on continuing to attract from our communities in terms of volunteers. With regards to diversity of our workforce, for us, again, I think you can see that our profile of male and female officers and staff across our workforce as a whole is very healthy. And again, we will continue to make sure that we strive to reflect our communities, not only in relation to gender, but other protected characteristics as well. And again, pushing forwards for our black and minority ethnic representation across the force. Again, we were the first Home Office force to achieve parity with our community representative from our community from black and Asian and minority ethnic communities at 3.4%. First Home Office force to achieve that. Again, we're not resting on our laurels. We're going to continue to work hard to make sure that we can achieve beyond that so that we can be ready for the release of the 2021 census data, which we anticipate an increase in that percentage as we go forward. In terms of our absence and our well-being, I think the greatest impact we've seen over the last 12 months, Commissioner, has been from coronavirus, and you can see the numbers there at the bottom of the page in relation to coronavirus or coronavirus symptoms being the top two absence reasons for North Yorkshire Police. That being said, we have actively engaged with our workforce in relation to putting in measures to make our workplaces safer, actively engaged using technology to maximise working from home. And again, our PPE provision to our staff continues. The safety measures, the additional cleaning measures within our buildings continues. So again, North Yorkshire Police has never had to resort to reducing any service provision across the period of the pandemic for any parts of our communities. Again, some forces have had to reduce the level of service that they've been able to provide, given the number of sickness levels they've experienced as a result of coronavirus. North Yorkshire Police has never had to do that. So again, that's down to dedication of our workforce and our staff and our leaders for making sure the environment's as safe as it can be. And again, we can continue to provide the safest services that we can to our communities and make sure none of those services have had to be suspended during this time. Again, that concludes our presentation, Commissioner. I'm just conscious of it's on time, and hopefully I think I've finished bang on time there for you.
You have. I'm impressed. Thank you. So in terms of questions from that, I think the only key question I would sort of pick up on, because we've covered quite a lot today, is the officer long-term FTE is 1,563. We're projecting actual numbers 1,514. I guess the message we want to put out is come and work, come and join our police force. We need you
Absolutely. Absolutely, it is a fantastic organisation to come and join. It isn't just a job; it is the job. I'm extremely proud to work for North Yorkshire Police. So we will be pushing that out. We've got great ambassadors all across the force in our existing workforce. So again, we will be recruiting. We'll be heavily recruiting going forward. We've got lots of transferees that want to come and join North Yorkshire Police from other forces. So don't be tempted by them. Come and join your home force and serve in your home county. I'm an example of somebody that grew up in North Yorkshire, and I served my whole policing career in North Yorkshire and wouldn't do anything different. So I'd encourage some other members of our community to come forward and do exactly the same.
Excellent. Who's got some questions? Anyone? Caroline? Yeah, everybody's very happy with the report, Phil. Well, thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable. So that is the penultimate. We've no questions from the public. So any other business and date of next meeting? I don't have any other business. The date of the next meeting is Tuesday, the 28th of September, 2021 at 1:30 again. Oh, and Jonathan Dyson has got his hand up before we close the meeting.
Sorry, Commissioner, just one very quick AOB, and this is just to say thank you to the crews and recognise their efforts. Scarborough, Red Watch and Filey recently did a charity car wash on the 29th and 30th of August over in Filey, and they raised a fantastic £527, which they're donating between Diabetes UK, a local cancer charity, and the Firefighters charity. And special thanks to Leyland Flynn, Nick Bennett and Scott Wilson for their what they've done to organise everything there, and to all the crews. Thanks very much, Commissioner.
Would you please pass on our thanks as well collectively?
I will do. Thank you.
That's fantastic news.
Thank you very much.
Good. Okay, fine. Unless there's anything else, I will close the meeting. Thank you.